Cold Millionaire CEO agreed to one last blind date. The girl who showed up changed his life forever. The rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the upscale French restaurant in the heart of Manhattan. Each droplet traced its own path down the glass, like tears the sky had been holding for too long. Inside, the world was warm. Golden light from crystal chandeliers, the soft murmur of Debussy floating through the air, the clink of expensive silverware against bone china. But Alexander Hayes felt none of it. He sat alone at table 12, the best seat in the house overlooking the glittering chaos of Fifth Avenue below. His Tom Ford suit was impeccable. His Patek Philippe watch caught the light just so. Everything about him spoke of control, precision, wealth accumulated through discipline and isolation. He checked his phone. 7:47 p.m., 13 minutes late. Alexander almost smiled. Almost. Lateness was a gift, really. It gave him an excuse to leave, to check this obligation off his list and return to the safety of his penthouse, where emotions were unnecessary and silence was king. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, weak but insistent from her hospital bed 3 days ago. "One more time, Alexander, for me, just try it one more time," he'd promised. And Alexander Hayes never broke promises, especially not to the woman who raised him alone, who sacrificed everything so he could become this monument of success and emptiness. The rain intensified, and then the door opened. Alexander Hayes built his empire on ice. His father left when he was 7. No goodbye, just an empty chair at breakfast and his mother's red eyes. The woman who promised forever at his college graduation turned out to be more interested in his trust fund than his heart. His business partner, his best friend, attempted a hostile takeover 2 years ago, smiling to his face while preparing the knife for his back. Each experience added another layer. Each hurt made him colder. Now, at 38, he lived 30 stories above humanity. His penthouse was a masterpiece of minimalist design, marble, steel, art chosen by consultants. Everything had its place. Nothing was out of order, including his life. 5 a.m. alarm, gym by 5:30, office by 7:05. Meetings, decisions, millions moved with signatures. Lunch was a protein shake. Dinner was whatever his assistant ordered. Nutritionally optimized, perfectly portioned, utterly forgettable. He had acquaintances, not friends. Colleagues, not companions. Women found him attractive, the money didn't hurt, but relationships died within weeks. They wanted something he'd forgotten how to give. His mother was the only crack in the ice. Margaret Hayes, 72, former elementary school teacher, current resident of Mount Sinai's cardiac unit, stage 4 heart failure. The doctors spoke in probabilities that made Alexander want to buy the entire hospital, but even his money couldn't fix this. "You've built such a beautiful prison, sweetheart," she'd told him last week, tubes making her look fragile as paper. "All these walls, do something for me, something foolish, something human." "What do you want, Mom?" "A blind date." "Just one, let someone surprise you." So here he sat, waiting for a stranger he'd never see again, fulfilling a promise to a dying woman who still believed her son had a heart somewhere beneath the ice. She wasn't what he expected. The woman who walked through that door wore a simple navy dress, slightly damp from rain, paired with worn ballet flats. Her dark hair, streaked with early silver, was pulled back loosely. She carried a canvas tote bag with a cartoon cat on it. She looked around Lumiere like someone who'd accidentally wandered into a museum after hours. The maitre d' approached with polite condescension. Alexander couldn't hear their conversation, but he watched her smile, genuine, apologetic, as she showed something on her phone. The maitre d's expression transformed. He gestured toward table 12, toward Alexander. Their eyes met across the golden-lit space. She didn't look impressed or calculating. She looked concerned, as if she could see through the expensive suit to something wounded underneath. She walked over, and Alexander catalogued details: calluses on her hands from real work, tiredness around her eyes, a slight limp in her left leg, a simple cross on a silver chain, no wedding ring. "Mr. Hayes?" Her voice was warm, textured like honey over gravel. "Alexander, please." He stood, extending his hand. She took it, her grip firm and warm. "Sophie Chen, I'm so sorry I'm late." The subway apologizes to no one. The subway. When was the last time Alexander had been on the subway? He couldn't remember. "Please sit." He held her chair, and she seemed surprised by the gesture. They settled into menu selection. The waiter appeared with wine recommendations that cost more than most monthly rents. "Just water for me, please," Sophie said simply. "Still, not sparkling. And could I see what you're doing with the halibut tonight?" The waiter described the dish with reverence. Sophie smiled. "That sounds lovely, thank you." She turned to Alexander, folding her hands. No rings, he noticed, and looked at him with unsettling directness. "So," she said, "how did you get roped into this?" The question caught him off guard. Most people danced around the awkwardness. She'd just named it, diffused it, made it human. "My mother," he admitted. "She's persuasive." "Mine too." Sophie smiled genuinely. "Margaret called my mother 3 weeks ago. They met at a charity function and kept in touch. My mother has been on a mission to settle me down ever since I turned 35, as if I'm some nomadic sheep." Despite himself, Alexander almost smiled. "And are you? Settled?" "I have an apartment in Queens, a job I love." "If that's settled, then yes. If settled means mansion and marriage, then no." "What do you do?" "I'm a hospice nurse." She said it simply. "I help people leave this world with dignity and as little pain as possible." Alexander felt something shift. That must be difficult. "It's the most important work I've ever done. Everyone fears death. But what they really fear is dying alone, in pain, unmourned. I make sure that doesn't happen. I sit with them, listen to their stories, hold their hands when there's no one else." The appetizers arrived, tiny architectural arrangements. Sophie bowed her head briefly, 3 seconds, then looked up. "Thank you. My mother would haunt me if I forgot." They ate in comfortable silence before Alexander asked, "How did you choose that path?" Sophie was quiet, then began, "My grandmother, pancreatic cancer. I watched her suffer in a hospital where she was just a room number. On her last night, I snuck in after visiting hours, climbed into her hospital bed, and described every flower from her garden in Beijing." She smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. "She died in my arms at 4:01 a.m. Her last words were, 'Thank you for bringing me home.'" Alexander had stopped eating. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. That night taught me, dying isn't medical, it's human. Someone should be there to remember that." They talked, or rather, Sophie talked, and Alexander listened in a way he hadn't in years. She spoke about patients like friends. Mr. Rodriguez, who loved big band music. Mrs. Patterson, who requested her dog for a final goodbye. 18-year-old Marcus, who wanted to watch the sunrise one last time. "Do you ever get tired?" Alexander asked. "Every day. But I'm not there for the death. I'm there for the life. Those last conversations, last laughs, last I love yous. I'm witnessing the most honest moments humans ever have. Alexander realized he was staring. The waiter cleared plates. Sophie excused herself, walked toward the kitchen and stopped to talk to the busboy she'd thanked earlier. She pulled something from her bag and pressed it into his hand. When she returned, Alexander raised an eyebrow. His name is Miguel. He's studying to be an EMT, working 3 jobs. I had a CPR manual in my bag. He mentioned he couldn't afford one yet. You just carry medical textbooks? You never know when someone might need something. I'm that person with the giant purse full of random useful things. My friends call me Mary Poppins. Dessert arrived. Sophie took one bite and made a small sound of pleasure. This is sinfully good. She caught Alexander watching her with an expression he didn't recognize. Most people I meet want something from me, he said. I want you to be happy. That's what I want from everyone. The check came. Alexander signed without looking. They walked to the door together. The rain had softened to mist. Sophie pulled out a battered umbrella, missing a spoke with a cartoon frog on it. Thank you for dinner, she said, and for listening. Most men just wait for their turn to talk. Thank you for being you. Your mother said you needed someone honest. I hope I wasn't too honest. You were perfect. The word hung between them like a held breath. Well then, Sophie said softly. Good night, Alexander. I hope you find what you're looking for. She walked into the misty night, her ridiculous umbrella bobbing above her head, her worn flats splashing through puddles. Alexander stood in the doorway of the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, watching a hospice nurse who rode the subway disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, the ice around his heart had a crack in it, and the cold millionaire didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. Both, he thought. Definitely both. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He lay staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Her voice, her stories, the way she looked at the busboy like he mattered. I want you to be happy. At 6 a.m. he cancelled his meetings and Googled Sophie Chen Hospice Nurse Queens, St. Anthony's Hospice Care Center, a small non-profit in a converted brownstone in Flushing. The website was simple, clearly built by volunteers. Sophie Chen, RN. Every ending deserves kindness. Alexander stared at the donation button for 5 minutes, then closed the laptop and tried to forget. 3 days passed. He worked late, attended a gala, felt nothing. Thursday evening, his mother called. How was she? She was fine. Fine? That's all? She's a hospice nurse. She rides the subway. She carries band-aids in a bag with a cat on it. She's everything I'm not. Silence. Then, she sounds wonderful. She is. So call her. Mum, Alexander James Hayes, I did not raise you to be a coward. She started coughing. Promise me. I don't have her number. Then show up. Be resourceful. Stop being so afraid. She hung up. Friday afternoon, Alexander went to Flushing. St. Anthony's was sandwiched between a Chinese bakery and a laundromat. The brownstone needed paint. A small garden struggled against urban pollution. Alexander stood in his 3-piece suit, completely out of place. The door opened. Sophie walked out with grocery bags talking over her shoulder. And if Mrs. Kim asks for more blankets, she's asking for company. She turned and nearly walked into him. Alexander. Hi. What are you doing here? I wanted to see you. Sophie shifted the bags. I'm delivering these to the Flores family. Want to come? The Flores lived in a fifth-floor walk-up. Sophie climbed like she'd done it 1,000 times while Alexander tried not to show how winded he was. Mrs. Flores opened the door, tiny, elderly, bright-eyed. "Sophie, and who is this handsome man?" "A friend. Alexander, this is Rosa and Eduardo Flores." The apartment smelled like garlic and love. Photographs covered every surface. Mr. Flores sat in a wheelchair by the window, oxygen tube in his nose. "Mi angel," he said when he saw Sophie. "Hi, Eduardo." She kissed his forehead. "How's the breathing today?" "Mejor." While Sophie checked vitals, Alexander stood awkwardly holding grocery bags. Mrs. Flores appeared at his elbow. "You care for our Sophie? We just met." "Aha, I have eyes. You look at her like my Eduardo looked at me 57 years ago." They spent an hour there. Sophie organized groceries, checked medications, helped Eduardo to the bathroom, chatted about their grandson's quinceañera. She never checked her phone, never hurried. When they left, Mrs. Flores pressed arroz con pollo into Sophie's hands. "For you and your amigo." Outside, the evening sun painted the buildings gold. "You do this every day?" Alexander asked. "That's the job." "They're not just patients to you." Sophie stopped walking. "No one is just anything, Alexander. Eduardo was a carpenter, built the altar at St. Raphael's Church with his own hands. Rosa was a seamstress. They came from Puerto Rico with nothing and built a beautiful life. Her eyes were fierce. In 3 months, maybe 6, Eduardo will die. Rosa will sit alone surrounded by photographs, but until then someone should remember he's not a diagnosis. He's a man who laughs, who loves his wife, who's proud of his grandchildren. Someone should see him." "You see everyone." "I try." At the subway station, Sophie turned to him. "Why did you really come today?" Alexander had prepared smooth answers, but he said, "Because you made me feel something I thought I'd buried forever." "What's that?" "Hope. That maybe I'm not as cold as I think." Sophie touched his hand briefly. "You're not cold, Alexander. You're scared. There's a difference." She disappeared through the turnstile, swallowed by the city. The next week, Alexander returned with a proposition. The director, Janet, met him in an office that doubled as a supply closet. "I'm not here to invest," Alexander said. "I'm here to volunteer." Janet's eyebrows climbed. "You want to volunteer? At a hospice?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I spend my life making money for people who already have too much. I want to do something that matters, even if I'm terrible at it." Janet studied him. "Training is Thursday evenings for 6 weeks. You'll shadow volunteers, and if Sophie tells you to back off, you back off. Understood?" "Understood." Sophie found out Thursday at 6:15 when she walked into the training room and saw Alexander in jeans and a gray t-shirt, the most casual clothes he'd worn in a decade. "You're kidding. I'm here to volunteer, that's all." "Why?" "Because you asked what I was looking for. I'm here to find out." Over 6 weeks, Alexander learned everything. He learned blood pressure, morphine doses. That listening was harder than talking. He sat with Mr. Patel, who told stories about India. He read poetry to Mrs. Washington, who'd lost her sight. He held Danny's hand, 18, dying from leukemia, who wanted someone to promise the world would remember him. And he watched Sophie move through the hospice like light through water, everywhere needed, nowhere rushed. When Mrs. Kowalski got agitated, Sophie sang Polish lullabies. When Marcus's mother broke down, Sophie held her in silence. One night at 2 a.m., Alexander found Sophie in the kitchen making tea, staring at nothing. Long shift? Mrs. Patterson finally went around midnight. I'm sorry. Don't be. She died with her daughter and Chester beside her. Sophie's hands shook as she poured. Alexander took the teapot. Let me. They sat in quiet. How do you do this? Alexander asked. Every day, all this grief? I don't carry it alone. That's the secret. One person can't hold all the world's pain, but a room full of people, all carrying a little bit each, that's manageable. Is that why you do this? No, I do this because someone has to remember. When they die, I'll carry their stories forward. That's what love is. Memory. Witness. Something in Alexander's chest cracked wider. For you're extraordinary. No, I'm just paying attention. She stood. You should go home. Sophie, thank you for being here. It means more than you know. She left, and Alexander sat alone, understanding for the first time what it meant to be changed by proximity to goodness. 2 weeks later, Sophie invited him to something personal. I volunteer at PS 108 on Saturday mornings, she said. We read to kids whose English is still developing, if you're free. What time? 10 a.m. I'll be there. PS 108 was a worn elementary school in Corona. Sophie led him to a classroom where 24 kids sat cross-legged, vibrating with barely contained energy. Who's that? A little girl asked, pointing at Alexander. This is Mr. Hayes. He's going to help today. Can he do voices? For 2 hours, Alexander sat on a carpet that smelled like crayons and read picture books about dragons and friendship. He did voices badly. He answered impossible questions. And he watched Sophie surrounded by children who climbed on her, hugged her legs, demanded her attention with the casual entitlement of kids who knew they were loved. During snack time, a small boy named Miguel approached. Mr. Hayes, are you Miss Sophie's boyfriend? Sophie across the room started laughing. Alexander's face heated. We're friends. Oh, you should be her boyfriend. She's really nice, and she needs someone to carry heavy things. After the session, walking to the subway, Sophie was still smiling. Sorry about Miguel. He's not wrong about the heavy things. Sophie stopped walking. Alexander, what are we doing? I don't know. I just know I don't want to stop. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm not looking for a project, and I'm not interested in being someone's redemption arc. That's not... Let me finish. You're in the middle of something. Learning to care again. That's beautiful. But I've been someone's emotional education before, and when they graduated, they left. I'm not going anywhere. You say that now. But my world isn't champagne and chandeliers. It's night shifts and dying patients and tiny apartments. Eventually, you'll go back to your real life. You're wrong. Am I? Give me a chance to prove it. Sophie studied him. Okay, but slowly and honestly. Deal? Deal. They shook hands, formal and ridiculous, and both started laughing. And for the first time in memory, Alexander Hayes felt joy, simple and uncomplicated like sunlight after a long winter. The ice was melting, and he wasn't afraid anymore. Understanding Sophie required patience. She didn't reveal herself in grand gestures. Instead, she unfolded slowly, the way she hummed while organizing medications, the photographs in her locker, her parents, an older woman, a golden retriever, the worn medical textbook she reread during breaks. Alexander learned by watching. She arrived an hour early for every shift to sit with patients who woke frightened. She paid for Mrs. Kim's groceries and pretended the hospice had a food program. She kept a notebook filled with patients' stories and read from it sometimes, keeping promises to people who'd already gone. "Why do you write everything down?" he asked one evening. "Because someone should remember. Mr. Rodriguez was the first in his family to go to college. Became a high school math teacher, taught for 40 years in the Bronx, helped hundreds of kids get scholarships, but he never married, never had children. When he dies, who'll know what he did?" "You will." "Exactly. These stories matter. These lives matter. If I have to be the keeper of memory, then that's what I'll do." It was beautiful and heartbreaking, but Alexander, in his eagerness to understand, made a mistake. He researched Sophie, discreetly at first, then obsessively. His investigators were thorough. Within 48 hours, he had a complete dossier. Sophie Chen, born in Queens to immigrant parents from Shanghai, Columbia pre-med, summa cum laude, accepted to Harvard Medical School with a full scholarship. Then, inexplicably, she turned it down, enrolled in nursing school instead. Her parents hadn't spoken to her for 2 years. There was more. Her father, Dr. James Chen, renowned oncologist, had died of pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. Sophie had been his primary caregiver, provided home hospice care herself. Her mother, once a concert pianist in Shanghai, now taught piano lessons from their small apartment in Flushing. And there was a man, Preston Montgomery III, Princeton-educated, now a prominent Manhattan surgeon. They dated for 4 years during her pre-med days. He'd proposed. She'd said yes. Then she chose nursing over medicine, and Preston had left. "I can't marry someone who wastes that kind of potential," he'd told mutual friends. Alexander understood now why Sophie had said, "I've been someone's emotional education before." Armed with this knowledge, Alexander thought he could help. He thought he understood her sacrifice, her choice, her path. He thought he knew what she needed. He was catastrophically wrong. It started with good intentions. Alexander made an anonymous donation to St. Anthony's, $250,000, earmarked for equipment upgrades and salary increases. Then he had his legal team draft expansion plans, new protocols for patient care, standardized procedures, efficiency metrics, everything a well-run organization needed. He brought in consultants, healthcare administrators from top hospitals, experts in non-profit management, people who knew how to scale operations and maximize impact. The problems started immediately. New equipment arrived before staff were trained. State-of-the-art monitors that nobody knew how to use. Electric beds that disrupted carefully orchestrated room arrangements. Automated medication dispensers that actually slowed things down because nurses had to navigate unfamiliar interfaces. His consultants implemented new policies, stricter visitor hours, to maintain patient rest schedules, mandatory documentation procedures to ensure legal compliance, standardized care plans to maintain consistency. Janet tried to raise concerns. "Alexander, these policies don't fit how we work. Trust me, they're necessary. I've consulted with the best healthcare administrators. We need flexibility, not rigidity. I'm trying to help." But help, Sophie had tried to tell him, wasn't about imposing solutions. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Alexander arrived at St. Anthony's to find Sophie and Janet in the office, both furious. "What happened?" he asked. Janet's expression was ice. "Your administrator tried to discharge Mrs. Kim, Said she's been here too long, that we need to optimize bed utilization. That's taken out of context, is it? Sophie stood, and he'd never seen her angry before. Mrs. Kim has nowhere else to go, Alexander. Her family is in Korea. She's dying. Where exactly should we optimize her to? The street? That's not what I meant. But it's what happened, because you brought in people who see patients as numbers, beds as inventory, death as inefficiency. I was trying to improve things. We didn't ask you to improve things, Sophie's voice cracked. We asked you to join us, to be part of what we do, not to fix us like we're a broken company you acquired. Sophie, do you even understand what we do here? We give people dignity, time, humanity. We sit with them when they're scared. We hold their hands when they die. We don't optimize that, Alexander. We honor it. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're treating this place like another deal. Throw money at it, implement systems, claim success. But this isn't about success. It's about care. And you can't buy care. You can't systematize compassion. The words hit like physical blows. Janet spoke quietly. Alexander, you've been generous, but you've also been tone-deaf. We're grateful for the resources, but we need you to step back. Let us integrate changes at our pace, in our way, or else you're helping us to death. He looked between them, two women he respected who were telling him he'd gotten it catastrophically wrong. I'll fix it, he said. No. Sophie's voice was gentle now, which somehow hurt worse. You'll listen. That's what fixing looks like. Not doing more, understanding better. She walked out. He tried to follow. Sophie, wait. I need space, Alexander. I need you to think about why you're really doing this. Is it for us? Or is it to prove something to yourself? Can't it be both? Not when both means steamrolling over what we've built. Her eyes were sad. You're a good man learning to be better, but you're still thinking like a CEO. That money and efficiency solve everything. They don't. Sometimes people need mess, need slowness, need things that don't make sense on a spreadsheet. Teach me. I've been trying, but you have to want to learn more than you want to lead. She left him standing there, surrounded by his expensive improvements, realizing he'd done exactly what he swore he wouldn't. Treated people as problems to solve rather than partners to respect. For 3 days, Sophie didn't return his calls. Alexander spent those days in hell, self-created, well-deserved hell. He met with Janet and staff, apologized, listened to hours of feedback. He fired the administrator who'd tried to discharge Mrs. Kim. He suspended all policy changes pending staff review. He donated the new equipment to hospitals that could actually use it and ordered replacements chosen by the St. Anthony's team. But mostly he sat alone and faced an uncomfortable truth. He'd been using St. Anthony's to prove he'd changed, to show Sophie, to show himself, that he could be different. But real change wasn't performative. It wasn't about grand gestures or impressive donations. It was about the quiet, daily work of listening, adjusting, sometimes just being present without trying to fix anything. He'd forgotten that. He'd forgotten everything Sophie had tried to teach him. On the 4th day, he found Sophie in the garden, tending Carmen's sunflowers. She didn't look up when he approached. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I know. You were right. About everything. I was trying to prove something instead of just being helpful. I know that too. I've spent 3 days listening to Janet and the team. We're reversing most of what I implemented, going slower, doing it right." Sophie finally looked at him, That's good. But I need to apologize specifically to you. I wasn't listening to you either. You told me this wasn't about fixing, and I ignored you. Why? The question clearly surprised her. Why what? Why did I ignore you? I never ignore you. Your opinion matters more than anyone's. So why? Sophie set down her gardening tools and brushed dirt from her hands. Because, she said carefully, you wanted to be the hero. You wanted to sweep in, save the day, prove you're not the cold billionaire anymore. But Alexander, you don't become a different person by changing your actions. You become a different person by changing your heart. And your heart was still trying to control everything. It was devastating truth. You're right. I usually am. It's annoying. I don't deserve you. Probably not. A smile grew. But I don't deserve you either. We're both messes figuring things out. The question is, can you actually let go? Can you trust that sometimes the best help is just showing up and asking, what do you need, instead of deciding for people? Alexander knelt in the dirt beside her, not caring about his expensive pants. I can. I will. I'm still learning how to be human, Sophie. I'm going to mess up. But I promise I'll listen when you tell me I have. She reached out and touched his face, tender and forgiving. Okay, I can work with that. Are we okay? We're okay. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and certain. But Alexander, next time you want to help someone, ask them first how they need help. Don't assume, don't impose, ask. Ask. Got it? Good boy. Did you just good boy me? You responded to it, didn't you? Despite everything, he laughed. And she laughed. And the tension broke like morning fog. They knelt together in the garden, surrounded by flowers that grew from grief and love, neither knowing that the universe was preparing its own lesson. Because some things couldn't be controlled. Some things couldn't be fixed. Some things just had to be survived. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. Alexander jerked awake to his phone vibrating, the harsh, insistent buzz of emergency. Hello? Mr. Hayes? This is Mount Sinai. Your mother had a major cardiac event. We've stabilized her, but you should come immediately. He didn't remember getting dressed, didn't remember the car ride. One moment his bedroom, the next running through hospital corridors, following a nurse to the cardiac ICU. His mother looked impossibly small in the bed. Tubes, wires, machines, all the technology Alexander had funded over the years, now keeping his mother tethered to life by threads. Dr. Patel met him outside the room, his face grave. She had a massive heart attack. We've done everything we can, but Mr. Hayes, her heart is failing. We can keep her comfortable, but the damage is extensive. Days, maybe a week. I'm so sorry. The words were medical, technical, ultimately meaningless. They all translated to the same thing. His mother was dying. Can I see her? Of course. She's sedated right now, but she knows you're here. Alexander sat by her bed and took her hand, so small, so fragile, bones covered in paper-thin skin. When had she gotten so old? Hey, Mom, he whispered. I'm here. You're not alone. Her fingers twitched in his, but she didn't wake. Alexander sat in that hospital room as the sun rose, painting the city gold, and felt the walls he'd torn down rebuilding themselves. The fear, the isolation, they rushed back in, protective and suffocating. His mother was the only person who'd loved him unconditionally, the only person who'd never wanted anything except his happiness. And now she was leaving. At 7 a.m. Janet called. "Alexander, Sophie told me about your mother. I'm so sorry." "Thank you. Take whatever time you need. Don't worry about the hospice." He should have said thank you again. Should have hung up. Instead, "Janet, can Sophie come? Can she? I don't know how to do this." A pause. "She's already on her way." Sophie arrived at 8:30, still in her scrubs from night shift, hair messy, exhaustion in her eyes. But when she saw Alexander, saw the fear and grief he couldn't hide, she simply opened her arms. He walked into them like coming home. "I can't do this," he whispered into her hair. "You can, and you're not doing it alone." She stayed. All day, through doctors' rounds and medication adjustments and the terrible waiting silence, she talked to his mother even though Margaret couldn't respond, telling her about the garden, about little Matteo, about the new volunteer who sang show tunes to patients. She brought music, a playlist of big band and jazz that Margaret loved. She adjusted pillows, monitored comfort, did all the small essential things Alexander didn't know how to do, and she held his hand. That evening, Margaret woke briefly. "Alexander," her voice was barely there. "I'm here, Mum." Her eyes found Sophie. "You brought her?" "Yeah." "Smart boy." Margaret smiled, weak but genuine. "Sophie Chen, the nurse who changed everything." "Mrs. Hayes." "Margaret, please." She tried to squeeze Sophie's hand. "Thank you for seeing him, the real him. He made it easy." Liar. But a kind liar. Margaret's breathing was labored. "Alexander, listen to me." "Mum, don't." "Hush, dying woman talking." She managed a wheezy laugh. "You found her, the person who makes you real. Don't let her go. Don't be afraid." "I'm not." "You are. You've been afraid since you were 7 years old, afraid of losing people, so you stopped having people to lose." "But Alexander," her grip tightened with surprising strength, "love is the only thing we take with us. Everything else, money, success, control, it's dust. But love? Love survives. Love is forever." Tears ran down Alexander's face. "I love you, Mom." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm so proud of you. Not for the money, for this. For choosing to feel things. For letting her in." She looked at Sophie. "Take care of him?" "I will." "Good." Margaret closed her eyes, exhausted. "Now somebody sing. Something happy. Death is sad enough without silence." Sophie started singing softly, an old jazz standard Alexander didn't know. Her voice was untrained but pure, and his mother smiled, tears on her own cheeks. "The way you wear your hat, the way you sip your tea, the memory of all that. No, they can't take that away from me." Margaret fell asleep to Sophie's voice, and Alexander watched the two women who'd changed his life, one leaving, one staying, and felt gratitude pierce through the grief. His mother died 3 days later on a Sunday morning, with Alexander holding one hand and Sophie holding the other. It was peaceful. No drama, no crisis, just breathing that grew slower, then stopped like falling asleep. "She's gone," Sophie said gently. Alexander couldn't speak, couldn't move. The grief was oceanic, crushing, absolute. Sophie wrapped her arms around him and let him break. He sobbed, huge, racking sobs that shook his whole body. All the tears he'd never cried for his father, for lost love, for years of loneliness. They came out now, unstoppable. And Sophie held him through it, murmuring nonsense comfort being the anchor he needed. "I've got you," she whispered. "I've got you. You're not alone." 2 weeks after the funeral, Alexander was at St. Anthony's, forcing himself to volunteer to honor his mother. When the fire alarm screamed, not a drill, smoke, actual smoke, billowing from the second floor. Chaos erupted. Nurses ran, evacuating patients, wheelchairs, oxygen tanks, organized panic. Alexander found Sophie helping Mrs. Kim into a wheelchair. "What happened?" he shouted over the alarm. "Electrical fire in the supply room. We need to get everyone out." "Where's Eduardo?" Sophie's face went pale. "3rd floor. He can't walk." "I'll get him." "Alexander, the smoke." He was already running. The stairwell was thick with smoke. Alexander covered his mouth with his shirt and climbed 3 flights that felt like 30 until he burst into the 3rd floor ward. Eduardo Flores sat in his wheelchair by the window, too weak to move himself, oxygen tank beside him. Rosa was trying to push him, but she was tiny, he was heavy, and panic made her clumsy. "Let me," Alexander said. "Thank God." He grabbed the wheelchair. "Rosa, carry the oxygen, stay close." They moved toward the stairs, but the smoke was thicker now, black and choking. The alarm was deafening. Alexander's eyes burned, his lungs screamed, but he kept pushing. At the stairwell, he realized the problem. Eduardo's wheelchair wouldn't fit through the doorway at the angle needed. "We'll have to carry him," Alexander said. "I can't, I'm not strong enough." Rosa was crying, coughing. "Yes, you are. Together. Come on." They lifted Eduardo from the chair, Alexander taking most of the weight, Rosa supporting his legs. Eduardo was barely conscious, his breathing labored. Down the stairs, 1 step at a time. The smoke followed them, 2nd floor landing. Alexander's legs were shaking. Rosa stumbled. "Keep going," he gasped. "Almost there." 1st floor. The smoke was lighter here. He could see the exit, glowing red, blessed and beautiful. They burst through the doors into the parking lot where firefighters were arriving, where patients sat on the ground being treated, where Sophie saw them and ran. "Eduardo, Rosa!" She helped them lay Eduardo down, checking vitals, adjusting oxygen. "You're okay, you're okay." She looked up at Alexander, who was bent over, coughing, his shirt black with soot, his hands blistered from hot wheelchair handles. "You idiot," she said, but her voice was pure love. "You beautiful, stupid, heroic idiot." "Had to," he gasped. "Couldn't leave them." The EMTs took Eduardo and Rosa. Sophie checked Alexander's hands, wincing at the burns. "Hospital. Now." "I'm fine." "Alexander Hayes, for once in your life, accept help." He let her lead him to an ambulance. The fire was contained quickly. Damage to 1 floor, no fatalities, mostly smoke inhalation. Investigation later revealed faulty wiring, something Alexander's renovations hadn't yet addressed. At the hospital, while a nurse bandaged his hands, Alexander watched news coverage on the TV. Dramatic rescue at Queen's Hospice. Millionaire CEO risks life to save elderly patient. He wanted to turn it off. He hadn't done it for publicity. He'd done it because Eduardo mattered, because leaving him wasn't an option. Sophie sat beside him, holding his unbandaged arm. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. "Tired, scared, grateful." "You saved his life." "We saved his life." "No." She turned to look at him fully. "You did. Rosa couldn't have moved him alone. He would have died, Alexander. You didn't hesitate. You just acted. What else would I do?" The old you would have called 911 and waited, delegated, stayed safe. She touched his face gently. But you ran toward the fire, toward the danger, to save someone who can't pay you back, who's just a dying man who needed help. Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. He told me stories about building that church altar, about Rosa, about his grandchildren. I know him, Sophie. He's not a patient, he's Eduardo. Yeah. Sophie's smile was radiant through her tears. You get it now. You finally get it. Get what? That loving people, really loving them, seeing them, showing up for them, that's the whole point. Not success, not wealth, not control, connection, witness, care. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You're not cold anymore, Alexander. I don't think you have been for a while. You just needed to prove it to yourself. They sat in the waiting room, both covered in soot, both exhausted, both alive. And Alexander Hayes understood that he'd spent his entire life running from moments like this. Messy, terrifying, completely out of his control, when in fact, these were the only moments that mattered. These were the moments that made you real. 3 days after the fire, Alexander woke in Sophie's apartment for the first time. Not his penthouse, hers. A tiny one-bedroom in Queens with mismatched furniture, plants on every surface, photographs covering the walls. It smelled like jasmine tea and old books, and felt more like home than his sterile palace ever had. Sophie was already awake, standing at the kitchen counter in pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt, making coffee in a French press that looked older than both of them. Morning, she said softly when she noticed him watching. Morning. She poured 2 mugs, mismatched, chipped, perfect, and brought one to him where he sat on her thrift store couch. He took it, their fingers brushing, and felt a peace he'd never known. Your hand's okay? She asked, nodding at his bandages. Better. You've been taking good care of me. That's the job. I'm not your patient, Sophie. No. She sat beside him, tucking her legs under herself. You're something much more terrifying. What's that? Mine. The word hung between them, tentative, hopeful, huge. Yeah? Alexander asked, barely breathing. Yeah, if you want to be. I've wanted to be yours since the moment you walked into that restaurant looking like you'd stumbled into the wrong planet. She laughed, that surprised, delighted sound he loved. I did stumble into the wrong planet. That place was absurd. $50 appetizers and waiters who judged my shoes. Your shoes are perfect. They're falling apart. Perfect, he repeated firmly. She set down her coffee and climbed into his lap carefully, mindful of his bandaged hands. Her arms went around his neck, and she looked at him with an expression that made his chest ache. I love you, she said simply. I'm in love with you, all of you, the parts that are healing and the parts still broken and everything in between. Sophie, let me finish. Her voice was gentle but firm. I love that you run into fires. I love that you cry at Disney movies. Don't think I didn't notice last week. I love that you memorize patients' grandchildren's names and that you can't cook to save your life and that you're trying so hard to be better every single day. She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. But I need you to know. I don't need you to save me. I don't need grand gestures or money or your penthouse. I just need you, the real you, showing up, being honest, letting me see you. You see all of me, Alexander said, his voice rough, more than anyone ever has. It's terrifying. Good, I like you terrified. Why? Because it means you're brave enough to be vulnerable. That's the hardest kind of brave. He kissed her then, slow and deep and certain, a kiss that tasted like coffee and promise, and the beginning of something that felt like forever. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sophie rested her forehead against his. "So what now?" she whispered. "Now?" Alexander smiled. "Now I make you breakfast. Or I try. It'll probably be terrible." "You can't cook." "I know, but I can learn. For you, I can learn anything." They spent the day in her apartment, a luxury neither could usually afford, just existing together. Sophie taught him to make scrambled eggs. He burned the first batch. They did laundry in the building's basement, and Alexander found inexplicable joy in folding her mismatched socks. They talked about everything: his mother's funeral, the fire, Eduardo's recovery, plans for St. Anthony's. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, folding a towel with intense concentration, "about the company, Hayes and Thornton." "Yeah?" "I don't want to run it anymore." Sophie looked up from sorting clothes. "Alexander, hear me out. I'm not abandoning it. I'm restructuring. Appointing a new CEO, someone brilliant who actually enjoys corporate warfare. I'll stay on the board, guide the philanthropic work, but the day-to-day. I'm done. What will you do instead?" He met her eyes. "I want to work at St. Anthony's, really work there. Not volunteer, not fund, work. Get my nursing degree maybe, or hospice care certification, whatever it takes to be useful." Sophie set down the laundry. "You're serious?" "Completely. My mother spent 40 years teaching elementary school. She was brilliant, could have done anything, but she chose kids, chose making a difference in small daily ways. I want that. I want to matter like she mattered." "You already matter." "Not the way I want to. Money matters, power matters. But me, Alexander Hayes, I want to be the person who shows up, who holds hands, who remembers stories. I want to be who you already are." Sophie crossed to him and took his face in her hands. "You can't be me. You can only be you." "But Alexander, the you that you're becoming, he's pretty extraordinary." "Yeah?" "Yeah." They kissed again, surrounded by the mundane magic of laundry and afternoon light, and Alexander thought, This is what happiness feels like." That evening they visited Eduardo in the hospital. He was recovering well, lungs healing, spirits high. Rosa sat beside his bed, holding his hand like she'd done for 57 years. "Alexander," Eduardo's voice was weak but warm, "they tell me you carried me like a bride." It was less romantic than it sounds. "Still, you saved my life, mijo. You would have done the same. Maybe when I was younger. Now I'm just old bones and stubbornness." Eduardo squeezed Rosa's hand. "But because of you I get more time, more mornings waking up next to this beautiful woman, more stories with my grandchildren, more sunsets." His eyes filled with tears. "How do I thank you for that? For more life?" Alexander felt his own throat tighten. "You live it. Really live it. That's thanks enough." Rosa stood and pulled Alexander into a fierce hug despite their height difference. "You're family now. You understand? Family." "I'd be honored." When they left, Sophie took his hand in the hallway. "You okay?" "Better than okay." He squeezed her fingers. "I just realized something." "What?" "This whole time, I thought I was saving people. But really, they've been saving me." Sophie smiled, and it was like sunrise. "Took you long enough to figure that out." A week later, Alexander made his decision official. He called a board meeting at Hayes and Thornton. 20 people around the mahogany table, skeptical faces, whispered concerns about his recent behavior. Marcus Thornton sat in the corner, smirking, waiting for Alexander to stumble. Alexander stood at the head of the table and spoke clearly. "I'm stepping down as CEO effective in 60 days. I'm appointing Jennifer Walsh as my successor. She's brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and actually enjoys this work. I'll remain on the board and chair our new philanthropic division." Shocked silence. "Some of you think I've lost my mind. You're wrong, I found it. For 15 years, I've made brilliant financial decisions that benefited strangers' portfolios, but I've met more real human beings in 4 months volunteering than in my entire career here." He looked around the table. "I'm redirecting my energy. Hayes Community Care Initiative will fund hospice programs, medical care for low-income families, community health centers. 10 million annually to start. You can support it or fight it, but it's happening." Marcus stood, face red. "You can't unilaterally—" "Actually, I can. Majority shareholder. Check the bylaws." Alexander gathered his papers. "I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough. And I'm done letting people like you define what success means." He walked out, leaving a stunned boardroom behind. His phone rang immediately. Janet from St. Anthony's. "Alexander? A lawyer just called about funding. What's happening?" "You're getting resources, better equipment, more staff, whatever you need." We can't possibly—" "Yes, you can. You save lives, Janet. Real lives. Let me help. The right way this time." Silence. Then, "Sophie know about this?" "Not yet. She's going to say it's too much." "Probably." "Good. That means she'll keep you honest." Janet's voice was warm. "Thank you, Alexander. Truly." He told Sophie that night in the garden. She listened silently as he explained the meeting, the funding, the decision to redirect his professional life. When he finished, she said, "You're sure?" "Completely. Because once you start down this road, being public about caring, about helping, you can't take it back. People will expect it, need it." "Good." She smiled, slow and beautiful. "Then I'm proud of you." "Yeah? Yeah." She stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet. "You're figuring out who you are." The real Alexander Hayes, I like him a lot. Only a lot. Don't push your luck. They laughed and it felt like freedom. Then Sophie took his hand, her expression turning serious. "Alexander, there's something I need to tell you. About why I really became a nurse. About what happened after my grandmother died. You don't have to. I want to." She sat on the garden bench, pulling him down beside her. "I told you I turned down Harvard Medical School. What I didn't tell you is why it was so hard." She took a deep breath. "My father was furious, my mother was heartbroken. But it was Preston, my fiancé, who really twisted the knife. He said I was wasting my potential, that I was choosing to be just a nurse when I could be a doctor, that I'd regret settling for less." Her voice wavered. "For 2 years, I believed him. I second-guessed everything. Wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I was throwing away my future for some romanticized notion of caregiving. What changed? My father got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I took a leave from my nursing job to care for him. And Preston..." She paused. "Preston left. Said he couldn't watch me waste more years playing nurse when I should be advancing my career. He proposed to someone else 3 months later, a cardiothoracic surgeon." Alexander felt rage spike hot. Sophie, it's okay, it hurt then, but now I see it was a gift. Because taking care of my father, being there for every moment of his last 6 months, that's when I knew. This was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not in an operating room making calculated decisions, but in the mess and the grief and the love of actual caregiving. She turned to him, eyes bright with tears. So when I said I've been someone's emotional education before, I meant it. Preston wanted me to be impressive. You wanted me to teach you how to be human. But Alexander, what I need you to understand is, I don't want to be your teacher or your redemption. I just want to be loved for who I am, not for what I can give you or show you or fix in you. That's exactly what I want, Alexander said fiercely. To love you, just you, not the lesson or the inspiration. You, Sophie Chen, with your cartoon cat bag and your terrible umbrella and your huge heart. You. Promise? I promise. You're not my education. You're my home. She kissed him then, and it tasted like trust and truth and tomorrow. And Alexander Hayes, who'd spent his life afraid of losing people, finally understood. Love wasn't about protection from loss. It was about choosing someone anyway. 4 months later, the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was full of Manhattan's elite, the annual Healthcare Heroes Gala, where wealthy donors congratulated themselves for funding causes that shouldn't need private charity in a just world. Alexander used to love these events. The networking, the power dynamics, the careful dance of influence and money. Now, standing backstage in his tuxedo, he felt only nervousness. Sophie stood beside him in a simple navy dress, the same one from their first date because it still works, and the hospice needs the donation money more than Bergdorf needs my business. You don't have to do this, she said quietly, adjusting his bow tie. Yes, I do. They're expecting you to talk about Hayes and Thornton, about market strategy or corporate philanthropy or... I know, I'm going to disappoint them. She smiled. Good. The MC's voice boomed, and now, please welcome Alexander Hayes, CEO of Hayes and Thornton Capital and founder of the Hayes Community Care Initiative. Sophie squeezed his hand. Be brave. Always. He walked onto the stage to polite applause, faced a room full of people who knew his net worth, but not his name, and began. Good evening. I'm Alexander Hayes, and I'm going to tell you about the worst year of my life. The room went quiet. 11 months ago, my mother made me go on a blind date. I didn't want to. I was too busy, too important, too comfortably numb to waste time on human connection. But she asked, and she was dying, so I went. He found Sophie in the crowd. She'd refused a seat at the head table, choosing instead to sit with Janet and the St. Anthony's staff. The woman who showed up changed everything. Not because she was beautiful, though she is, not because she was impressive, though she is, but because she was real. She saw through all the armor I'd built and asked one simple question, "What are you looking for?" Alexander paused, letting the weight settle. I didn't have an answer then, but I do now. I was looking for purpose, for meaning, for a reason to be human instead of just successful. He gestured to the room. Most of you know me as a businessman, a money manager, someone who turns investments into profits. And yes, I'm good at that. But I'm here tonight to tell you, that's the least interesting thing about me. Uncomfortable shifting in the audience. This wasn't the speech they expected. For the past 11 months, I've been volunteering at St. Anthony's Hospice Care Center in Queens. I've changed bedpans, held hands, watched people die. And I've learned more about value, real value, than I learned in 15 years of corporate warfare. He looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the event. Here's what hospice taught me. We measure the wrong things. We count money, power, square footage, quarterly returns. We compare portfolios and titles and social climbing. But when people are dying, when they're facing the end and reviewing their lives, no one talks about their stock portfolio. His voice grew passionate. They talk about love, about the time they spent with family, about kindness given and received, about whether they mattered, not in a Forbes list way, but in a did I make someone's life better way, about whether they were seen, known, remembered. He saw some people nodding, others looked uncomfortable. Good. I'm here tonight to announce that I've stepped down as CEO of Hayes & Thornton. I've transitioned to full-time work with the Hayes Community Care Initiative, focusing on hospice programs, end-of-life dignity, and community health. Gasps. Whispers. Marcus Thornton looked like he'd swallowed glass. But more importantly, I'm here to introduce you to people who actually deserve recognition, people who do the hardest work in our society for the least reward, people who see humanity where others see inconvenience. He gestured to Sophie's table. Sophie Chen is a hospice nurse. She makes $48,000 a year. She works night shifts and weekends. She holds the hands of dying strangers and makes sure no one leaves this world alone. She's saved more lives, real, meaningful lives, than every person in this room combined. Sophie had gone bright red, shaking her head, but people were turning to look. Janet Morrison runs St. Anthony's on a shoestring budget, performing miracles with duct tape and determination. Rosa Flores has spent 57 years loving one man through poverty, immigration, and terminal illness. Eduardo Flores built a church altar with his own hands and raised a family that spans 3 generations of kindness. His voice softened. These aren't names you'll see in the Wall Street Journal. They're not influencers or celebrities, but they're heroes, real heroes. The kind who show up every day and do hard things because someone has to, because love demands it, because they understand what actually matters. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, worn, folded many times. My mother died 4 months ago. Before she passed, she told me, love is the only thing we take with us. Everything else is dust. She was right. He looked directly at Sophie. I spent 38 years building walls, protecting myself from pain by not letting anyone in. I became cold, efficient, successful, and completely empty. Then I met someone who taught me that being human isn't a weakness. It's the whole point. Tears now, but he didn't care. So here's my message tonight. Stop measuring your life in dollars and start measuring it in moments, in connections, in the number of times you showed up for someone who needed you, in the hands you held, in the grief you shared, in the love you gave without expecting return. He folded the paper. We're all dying. Every person in this room, it's happening right now, one heartbeat at a time. The only question is, when we get to the end, what will we have that matters? Money, power, or love, witness, the knowledge that we saw people and let ourselves be seen? Complete silence in the ballroom. Profound, ringing silence. Thank you for the award. I'm donating it to St. Anthony's. And thank you for listening. Now please, go call someone you love. Go be human, because that's the only success that counts. He walked off stage to stunned silence that slowly became applause, uncertain at first, then building, then thunderous. Backstage, Sophie was waiting. You're insane, she said. Probably. You just told a room full of billionaires that money doesn't matter. It doesn't, not the way they think. They're going to crucify you in the business press. Let them. She grabbed his face and kissed him hard. I'm so proud of you, I could burst. Yeah? Yeah. Later that night, they escaped to the garden at St. Anthony's, their place, their sanctuary. The city sounds were distant. The air smelled like earth and flowers. Carmen's sunflowers glowed silver in the moonlight. Alexander knelt in the dirt among those flowers. Sophie Chen, he said, pulling out a small velvet box. Will you marry me? She laughed through instant tears. You're supposed to... I know. I'm on my knees, in the dirt, where I belong, with you. He opened the box, a simple silver ring with a small sapphire, antique and beautiful. I'm still learning. I mess up regularly. I try to fix things that don't need fixing and forget to ask before helping. But I want to keep trying, with you, for the rest of my life. However long that is, whatever it looks like, wherever it goes. I want to spend it showing up for you the way you've shown up for me. Sophie was crying openly now. Yes. Yes? Yes, you idiot. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything about them. Awkward at first, but ultimately right. They kissed in the garden while around them the city hummed with life and death and everything between. I love you, Alexander whispered against her lips. I love you too, even though you're dramatic and give speeches that make me cry and probably just tanked your social reputation forever. Worth it, yeah? Sophie, you're worth everything. She pulled back slightly, looking at him with eyes that held the whole world. You know what the best part is? What? You don't need me anymore. To teach you or change you or show you how to be human. You already are. You're just you. And I get to love that person. I'll always need you. That's different than needing me to fix you. I know. He kissed her forehead. I need you because life is better with you in it. Because you make me laugh. Because you see me, not because I'm broken. Exactly. They sat together among the flowers, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely place and planned a future that looked nothing like either of them had imagined. A future built on showing up, on being present, on loving people so fully that losing them would destroy you, and choosing to love them anyway. 3 weeks later, Eduardo Flores died peacefully at St. Anthony's, surrounded by his family, with Sophie holding his hand and Rosa singing softly in Spanish. At the funeral, Alexander sat in the back of the small church and stared at the altar Eduardo had built with his own hands 40 years ago. Intricate woodwork, beautiful carvings, every detail perfect. Rosa approached him after the service. He loved you, you know. Called you mi hijo, my son. I loved him too. Because of you, he got 6 more months. 6 more months of sunrises and grandchildren and love. That's everything. She hugged him fiercely. Thank you for seeing him, for remembering he mattered. After she left, Sophie found Alexander still staring at the altar. You okay? Yeah. He turned to her. I just realized, Eduardo's going to outlive all of us. What do you mean? This altar, it'll be here for another 100 years. Everyone who gets married in this church, everyone who prays here, everyone who finds comfort here, they're standing in front of something Eduardo built. His hands, his skill, his love. That's immortality, not money or power. creating something that outlasts you. Sophie took his hand. What do you want to create? A life that matters. With you. That's enough. Yeah, she said softly. That's more than enough. 1 year later, the new wing of St. Anthony's Hospice Care Centre opened on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year to the day after Alexander Hayes walked into a French restaurant and met the woman who changed his life. The building was beautiful, all light and warmth, and carefully designed for dignity. Patient rooms with windows overlooking the expanded garden, a kitchen where families could cook comfort food, a children's playroom for when young visitors needed distraction from grief, a meditation space with windows to the sky. Everything Alexander had wanted to impose a year ago, now built with input from the people who actually worked there. Slower, better, right. The ribbon cutting was simple. Janet and Sophie with oversized scissors, a small crowd of staff, volunteers, and patients' families. Alexander stood in the back, watching Sophie in her element, laughing with Mrs. Kim, accepting hugs from Rosa, lifting little Matteo into her arms. She caught his eye across the crowd and smiled. Private, warm, theirs. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the gratitude and the tours, they found each other in the garden. "Hey," she said. "Hey, yourself. How does it feel? Your dream realized?" "Not my dream. Ours. And it feels..." He looked around at the building, the flowers, the people. "It feels like the beginning." "Of what?" "Everything." 6 months later, the wedding. They married at St. Anthony's because where else would they? The common room transformed with flowers from the garden, Carmen's sunflowers, blooming like promises. The staff and volunteers filled the chairs. Patients who could travel came. Rosa brought Eduardo's photograph and set it in a place of honor right beside Margaret's. Little Matteo was the ring bearer. He took the job very seriously, walking with exaggerated slowness down the aisle, tongue stuck out in concentration. Janet officiated. She'd gotten ordained online specifically for this, which made everyone cry before the ceremony even started. Sophie wore a simple white dress and carried sunflowers. Alexander wore a grey suit, not his usual designer armor, but something softer, more him, and cried through his vows. "I promise to show up," he said, voice shaking but steady. "Every day, in every way. I promise to listen before helping, to ask instead of assuming, to be human instead of perfect. I promise to hold your hand through all of it, the joy and the grief, the mundane and the magnificent. I promise to see you, really see you, every single day." Sophie's vows were simpler. "I promise to love you, in the mess and the beauty, in the strength and the breaking. I promise to remind you you're human when you forget. I promise to be your home." They sealed it with a kiss that felt like forever. The reception was held in the garden. Folding tables covered with mismatched tablecloths, food from the Chinese bakery next door, music from someone's Bluetooth speaker playing big band and jazz. It was perfect in its imperfection, beautiful in its simplicity. Mrs. Kim gave a toast in Korean that no one understood, but everyone felt. Miguel the busboy, now a certified EMT, presented them with the CPR manual Sophie had given him, signed by his entire graduating class. Rosa cried and laughed and told anyone who would listen that she'd called it from the beginning. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Alexander and Sophie danced in the garden while their chosen family watched and celebrated. "Happy?" Sophie asked, her head on his shoulder. More than I knew was possible. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Best decision I ever made. She pulled back to look at him. You know what I love most? What? You're still you? Not who you think you should be, not who anyone expects you to be, just Alexander. My Alexander. Yours, he confirmed. Always. 1 year after the wedding, Alexander Hayes, formerly Cold Millionaire CEO, now certified hospice care worker and volunteer coordinator, sat in a patient's room at 3 a.m., holding the hand of a 92-year-old woman named Judith. She was dying, hours left, maybe less. Her family had said goodbye earlier, exhausted and grief-worn, unable to keep vigil any longer. But someone should be here, Alexander thought. No one should die alone. So he sat. And when Judith woke briefly, confused and scared, he said, "It's okay. I'm here. You're not alone." She squeezed his hand, barely, but real. "Tell me." Her voice was a whisper. "Tell me something beautiful." So Alexander told her about Sophie, about their wedding in the garden, about the sunflowers that bloomed every year in Carmen's memory, about how love had saved him when he didn't even know he needed saving, about how showing up matters more than anything else in this world. Judith smiled, a distant, dreamy expression crossing her weathered face. "You're lucky," she breathed. "I know. The lucky ones, they're loved." Her breathing slowed. Alexander held her hand tighter. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting me be here, for trusting me with this." She died at 4:17 a.m., the sky just starting to lighten with the promise of dawn. Alexander sat with her for a while longer, saying a silent prayer, not really to anyone in particular, just to the universe, thanking it for second chances and unexpected grace. Then he texted Sophie, "Going to be late." Judith passed peacefully. "Headed home soon, love you." Her response was immediate. "Take your time, I'll have coffee ready, love you more." He smiled at the screen. Even after a year of marriage, they still competed over who loved whom more. He suspected they'd be having that argument for the next 50 years. He hoped so. 5 years later, Alexander and Sophie's apartment, bigger now, in a better neighborhood, but still modest by his former standards, smelled like Sunday morning pancakes and beautiful chaos. Their daughter Emma, 3 years old, crashed through the living room wearing fairy wings and rain boots, chasing their golden retriever named Eduardo. "Daddy, Eduardo ate my pancake." "The dog or the pancake?" "The pancake!" Sophie appeared from the kitchen, laughing, flower in her hair, carrying a spatula like a weapon. "Emma Hayes, what did we say about feeding the dog people food?" "That it's bad for his tummy." "Exactly. Come help me make more." "Ache." Emma abandoned the dog and rushed to help, climbing onto a stool at the counter, helping in the way 3-year-olds help, which meant making an adorable mess and stealing chocolate chips when she thought no one was looking. Alexander watched from the doorway. This life he'd built, this family, this beautiful, chaotic, utterly ordinary extraordinariness. Sophie caught him looking and smiled. "You okay?" "Perfect." "Liar. You're crying." "Happy crying. There's a difference." She crossed to him, stood on her toes despite the flour on her hands, and kissed him gently. He tasted like coffee, and she tasted like vanilla and home. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you more." "Impossible." "Watch me try." Emma interrupted. "Mommy, "Daddy, the pancakes are burning!" They rushed to the kitchen together. A team, a family, a home built on showing up and staying and choosing each other every single day. And Alexander Hayes, who'd once been cold enough to freeze the world, understood that he'd been wrong about everything that mattered. Happiness wasn't in control or perfection or protection from pain. It was in messy kitchens and burnt pancakes and a dog named after a dead friend. It was in showing up, in being seen, in loving people so fully that losing them would destroy you and choosing to love them anyway. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Alexander and Sophie sat in their living room with tea and comfortable silence. On the mantel sat a gallery of photographs. Margaret Hayes, smiling in her hospital bed, holding baby Emma just weeks before she died. Eduardo and Rosa on their 50th anniversary dancing. Danny, the 18-year-old, in a hospital gown with a bright smile and hope in his eyes. Judith, young again, in a sepia-toned wedding photo from 70 years ago. Mr. Rodriguez with his grandchildren, Mrs. Patterson with Chester the dog, a gallery of love, a gallery of witness, a gallery of showing up. "They'd be proud of you," Sophie said quietly, following his gaze. "Of us." "Yeah, us." She curled into his side, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat in the comfortable silence of people who knew each other completely. Outside, the city hummed. Lives were being lived, some filled with joy, some with pain, most with both. People were being born and dying, falling in love and breaking apart, finding meaning and losing it and finding it again. And somewhere in Queens, at St. Anthony's Hospice Care Center, someone was holding a stranger's hand, offering comfort, being the witness that everyone deserves. Maybe one of them would remember this story, the cold millionaire and the nurse who saw through his ice. Or maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter, because the story was never really about Alexander and Sophie. It was about what they learned, that kindness transforms even the coldest hearts, that showing up is the bravest thing we do, that love, real, messy, imperfect love, is the only thing we take with us when we go. He thought it was just one last blind date, but it became the night that changed everything. Because sometimes love doesn't find you in perfection, it finds you in kindness, in patience, in someone who sees you, really sees you, and stays anyway. Alexander and Sophie's story reminds us of something we often forget. We're all one moment away from transformation, one conversation away from hope, one act of courage away from becoming who we were meant to be. Maybe you know someone like Alexander, someone whose heart has gone cold, who's built walls so high they can't see the sky anymore. Maybe that someone is you. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that change is possible, that love can thaw even the iciest heart, do me a favor. Hit that like button, not for us, but as a small act of hope, a signal to the universe that you believe in second chances too. Leave a comment below. Tell me, who in your life showed up for you when you needed it most? Who was your Sophie? Or maybe you were someone's Sophie. Share that story. Let's create a space where kindness is celebrated, where showing up matters. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us what it means to be human, to love, to heal, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the world needs more reminders that coldness can melt, that walls can come down, that it's never too late to choose connection over isolation. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's forgotten they have a heart beneath the armor, someone who's waiting for permission to feel again. Because here's the truth Alexander learned, and maybe we all need to remember. Love isn't weakness. Vulnerability isn't failure, and showing up, really showing up for people, is the bravest thing we ever do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that stories like this still matter, because they do. You do. And somewhere out there, someone needs you to show up. Be their Sophie. Be their turning point. Be the proof that kindness changes everything. Until next time, stay human, stay hopeful, and never stop showing up.